We often hear the debate, what is right, what is wrong, what is moral, and what is immoral. But who is actually there to define what is moral and what is immoral? And if we can't come up with a consensus on what this is, how can we put sexuality to deal with this? And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Today I'd like to discuss how human sexuality has no moral content, but rather fits into personal pleasure. Now to do this, we're going to look at 3 points. First, we're going to look at how morality is subjective. Second, we're going to look at what human sexuality is, the one that we're discussing. And thirdly, we're going to look at how human sexuality doesn't fit into morality, but rather fits into personal pleasure. So the first point, morality is subjective. Now, everybody has a different view of what something being moral is, but in order to understand this, we need to understand the misconceptions about what morality is. Often people think that moral has to do with being right or wrong. Now the problem with this is someone's view on what is right and what is wrong is up to their own interpretation. What I think is right, you may think is wrong. Or from country to country, looking somebody in the eye in the United States is respectful, but in the Middle East, looking somebody in the eye is disrespectful. So this varies on a universal spectrum, so we can't base it on right and wrong. Another misconception is basing it on whether something is legal or illegal. Just because something is moral doesn't make it legal, and vice versa. Now this is a problem because laws vary throughout the world as well, or just because something has been legal doesn't necessarily make it right in someone's opinion. You know, slavery used to be legal before, but then now we've had laws that have changed that. So laws are changing and we can't base morality off of whether it's legal or not. So now that we've discussed how morality is subjective, we need to focus on what factors it brings, and that's your culture, your religion, your family, your personal views, and all of these differ from person to person. So my culture and religion could be different from yours or different from yours, so therefore we can't come to a universal definition of what morality is. So now that we've distinguished that morality is subjective, we're going to look at what human sexuality is. Now, human sexuality is defined by Options for Sexual Health as how a person expresses himself, herself as a sexual being with consent from others involved. Now, sexuality includes 3 parts. It's a biological aspect, which is whether your chromosomes are 2 X's or an X and a Y. It is your gender identity, and gender identity is defined by DeVore, who has a PhD in sociology, as a social status usually based on the convincing performance of femininity or masculinity. A person may be a woman, man, or transgender. Now, to be transgendered means you identify as neither gender, both genders, or you identify yourself as a gender opposite of your biological sex. And the third part of sexuality is your sexual orientation, which is defined as who you are romantically or sexually involved in and attracted to. This can be heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. Now, when talking about your sexual relations you have with somebody, it's important to note that we are talking about something that has sexual consent. And sexual consent means that, according to the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, that both people in a sexual encounter agree to it and may decide to no longer consent at any time. Now, in order to be able to consent, you have to meet 3 criteria. You have to be of age, you have to be physically and mentally healthy enough to decide, and you can't be under the influence. So now that we distinguished what type of sexuality we're talking about, and that it includes being consenting, now we can look at how sexuality fits more into personal pleasure rather than being moral. So first off, because there is not one universal definition of what morality is, we can't say that sexuality has to do with being moral or immoral, so therefore it has no moral content. And secondly, we're going to look at how sexuality goes into personal pleasure. And personal pleasure is defined by dictionary.com as the enjoyment or satisfaction derived from what is one's liking. Now, sexuality fits into this because things that are your gender identity, which is how you act, how you dress, the things you do, those are all based on something that you like to do. If it's your personal needs, you do it to fulfill your happiness. And by doing this, you are fulfilling your liking, which is what personal pleasure is defined as. And same thing goes with sexual orientation. Whether you decide to date a man or a woman or who you have relations with is based on what you like, and that is the definition of personal pleasure. Now, it's important also to note that we all have a right to have our own pleasures, opinions on our pleasures of what we like. And as long as it doesn't harm anybody, these are our likings. And according to the University of Pennsylvania, who conducted a study, most people agree to harm-based pleasures, which means that as long as it doesn't hurt somebody's welfare, justices, or rights, you have a right to have these pleasures. In sexuality, as long as it is consented between people, you're not doing harm to anybody outside of the two partners involved. So overall, I'd like to say that human sexuality has no moral content, but rather it fits this definition of personal pleasure. Thank you.
Here's the story. There was a blind girl who hated herself just because she was blind. She hated everyone except for her boyfriend. He was always there for her. She said that if only she could see the world, she would marry him. One day, someone donated a pair of eyes to her, and then she could see everything, including her boyfriend. The girl was shocked when she saw that her boyfriend was blind too, and refused to marry him. Her boyfriend walked away in tears and later wrote a letter to her saying, "Just take care of my eyes, dear." Morals. It is important to have morals in everything that we do, including human sexuality. Human sexuality has moral content and is not simply a matter of personal pleasure. This is what I hope to convey to you today. First, we will talk about exactly what human sexuality is. Second, we will talk about what is moral. And third, we will talk about how human sexuality is moral. What is human sexuality? Human sexuality is defined as the ways we experience and express ourselves as sexual beings. The site Speedies, that was developed as a result of personal experiences of professionals obtaining continuing education, states, human sexuality involves much more than anatomy and sexual responses, but incorporates how we engage in relationships and behaviors that determine our desires and sexual identity, as well as our overall sexual health, well-being, and our perceptions and expressions. Now that we know exactly what human sexuality is, we will move on to what is moral. Now, what is moral? Moral is defined as pertaining to or concerned with the principles or rules of right conduct or the distinction between right and wrong. For something to be moral, it must meet certain criteria. The criteria I have said is that there must be a right and a wrong side in the object or the situation. For example, it is good to not murder someone, and it is bad to murder someone. We are taught what is right and wrong from society, and what society thinks is right and wrong. And this leads me to my second point, that society must mostly be unanimously agreed that the subject at hand is good or bad. For example, the majority of society, if not all of society, frowns upon the act of murder. This may sound like a definition of ethics, but morals come out of what society finds to be good and bad. In the words of Ducky from TV shows NCIS, the ethical man knows he shouldn't cheat on his wife, whereas the moral man knows he wouldn't cheat on his wife. So where ethics changes into morals is where you don't do something society thinks it's wrong, but you know it's wrong. Morals are based off of ethics. We learn morals from what society feels is ethical. Now that we know what moral is and what human sexuality is, we will see how human sexuality has moral content. A quote from C.S. Lewis, who is a well-known novelist, poet, academic, literal critic, and he states, "Like all powerful lies, it is based on a truth, the truth. Acknowledged above, the sex in itself is normal and healthy, and all the rest of it. The lie consists in the suggestion that any sexual act to which you are tempted at the moment is also healthy and normal. Now this, on any conceivable view, and quite apart from Christianity, must be nonsense. Surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousies, lies, concealment, and everything that is the reverse of health, good humor, and frankness." A quote by Bertrand Russell, who is the Nobel Prize winner for literature, states, "Morality in sexual relations, when it is free from superstition, consists essentially and solely as a means of personal gratification with regard to his or her desires. Sexual immorality, on the other hand, is defined as evil ascribed to sexual acts that violate social conventions." Now, society has certain things that they consider bad. One of them is child molestation, which is an act of having sex with a child when you are an adult. And then the penalty for that in California is that you will go to jail for at least 8 years. If force was used, it's up to 10 years. Now, another thing that society thinks is bad is rape. Rape is a crime of forcing another person to submit to sexual acts, especially sexual intercourse. The penalty for rape in California, according to shouse.com, which is a site for crime and the penalties that go with it, is between 3 to 8 years in California state, and if it's with a minor, it's 7 to 13 years. Society also believes adultery is bad. Although adultery is not illegal, it still is viewed in society as immoral and bad.
Reply. You've got 2.5 minutes.
Okay, so to begin with what my opponent said, basing something on whether it is right or wrong as being moral, like I said, everybody's view of what is right and what is wrong varies from person to person. There still is not one universal definition of what is moral. People basing it off what the majority of society does doesn't necessarily make it right. You know, I'm sure there's things in your life that you don't agree that society says is the right or wrong. That's why people are constantly fighting things throughout society, like marriage rights and such. And as far as murder goes, like murder is typically seen as bad, but in the case of self-defense, we see murder as okay. So even in that case, we don't have a definition for murder as being right or wrong. There are exceptions to all of this. In regards to child molestation, I defined sexuality as something that is consented. And molestation is, one, it's not consented. It's of someone who is underage, which means that they don't qualify as being able to consent. And it's the same with rape. Rape is not consented by an individual. It is an act of violence. Adultery, even though it is typically seen as bad, it is consented by the two people involved. And in that person's mind, they see that as okay. Their morals may show that that's what they think is okay, and you're in no place to judge what they see as right or wrong. It's based on their own culture, their religion, their personal and family experiences. So overall, your morality is based on your personal beliefs, so we can't say that this sexuality has anything to do with moral content. It is your personal pleasure because you are fulfilling what your liking is. Thank you.
Now, my opponent said that there is no universal right or wrong. But then how would we consider things right or wrong? Like, for example, why would we think that rape is wrong, or why would we think that child molestation is wrong? There is a set of simple morals. Not everyone has the same exact morals, but everyone should at least have certain morals to see which is right and wrong. Also, she was stating that she concluded that that they have to consent and that that's all her criteria. But if something is actually personal pleasure and if they want to do something like that, that's their personal pleasure. Their personal pleasure is to have sex with young children. Their personal pleasure is to rape innocent victims. And then if we didn't have morals that we thought was right and wrong, society would be in chaos. People would be around not doing things in their own personal home anymore, but out in public, and people would be okay with that. Thank you.
Closing statements, 3 minutes.
Okay, so overall we talked about how morality is subjective, and it is. It's up to your own personal needs. And just because society has a standard of what is typically seen as good or bad doesn't make it good or bad. We can't base it on what society does, and even though there are certain acts such as rape that are seen as bad, that's talking about something that's not consented, and sexuality is defined by something that is consented between the two individuals involved. So those are the only types of actions that are being considered here. We talked about how morality is subjective and how it's based on different criteria for each individual. We also talked about how human sexuality has to do with your gender identity, what you do, how you dress, how you act, and your sexual orientation of who you decide to be with. And these are all your personal desires. It's what you're attracted to. It may be different from the person sitting next to you or what other societies prefer. This is your own personal liking, and that's what personal pleasure is. So from that, we can conclude sexuality has to do more with what your personal pleasure is. It fits into that more, and it doesn't have to do with moral content. We can't say sexuality is moral or immoral if we don't even have a universal definition of what something being moral and immoral is. So on that, I'd like to read you a quote by Anita Sood, who's a psychiatrist in sexuality, and she says, "So whatever you opt for, whether it be a multi-partner system, a monogamy, or whatever you choose, it should be a matter of decision limited to you and your partners. It is not a moral issue." So on that, I leave you with human sexuality does not have moral content, but rather is a matter of simple personal pleasure. Thank you.
Closing statement, 3 minutes.
Now, I've been up here and you heard me talk about what I think of moral, but now I'm going to talk about how human sexuality cannot be personal pleasure. For a statement of homosexuality, there are other things involving it that make it not like a personal choice. Things such as genetics, although it is not completely proven, there are things that have been researched. For example, epigenetics, which is it's a sensitivity to hormones in the womb. So it's supposed to regulate testosterone, but if that malfunctions, that could cause males getting less of testosterone or women getting too much testosterone, which could lead to homosexuality. Also, there are some environmental factors that can contribute to it, which is parent and child relationship problems or sexual abuse and other sexual experiences. Also, for bisexuality, there are certain things being researched that there is some kind of chemical in your body that is supposed to be in women to help them be more attracted to men in order to want to reproduce more. And this can sometimes get passed on to men, and therefore it explains the bisexual tendencies. Now today we talked about how what is moral, what is human sexuality, and what is defined as personal pleasure for my accounts. And I hope that you understand that human sexuality has moral content and there is no personal pleasure in it. I hope you all understand. Thank you.